Subjective writing, by definition, is existing in the mind. At least that's the definition of subjective, the word. So it exists in the mind. It belongs to the thinking subject rather than to the object of thought. Confusing. And also, the definition includes placing excessive emphasis on one's own moods, attitudes, and opinions. Essentially, it's self-centered writing, I think. I would like to think of it like that. It's writing that is what you think, using your opinions and your ideas. And most writing is actually subjective or has subjective elements. Something that's purely subjective is not going to use anyone else's ideas. It's just going to come from what you think. It's an I think this, I think that type piece of writing. The purpose of subjective writing, and there's so much place for subjective writing. In fact, most academic papers have elements of subjectivity, and the arguments could not be made without those elements of subjectivity. So subjective writing is not bad. It's just, in academic writing, it's not the only thing you want to rely on, because then there is no support. Subjective is usually the claims you're making, and the objective support is how those claims hold up, the pillars on which they stand. So the purpose of subjective writing is to explain our opinions on a specific topic and persuade others to agree with our point of view. That's why we write subjectively. Alternatively, it could not be persuasive, but simply just I would like you to understand my experience. So if you think of a first-person narrative or an account of someone's experience in life, their autobiography written by them, maybe they don't necessarily want you to agree with anything, but they just want you to know their experience. That's subjective writing. However, most of the time, if we're talking about argumentative pieces of writing, the point is to persuade people to believe what you believe, or to at least try to believe what you believe. Some common examples: blogs. Most posts and comments on social media are subjective. Well, I think this. Well, I think that. Well, I disagree with you. Well, I'm gonna leave, right? And then op-eds, which are opposite the editorials. Essentially, they're opinion-based writings found in newspapers. Subjective writing cannot be evaluated for whether or not it's true, but it can be judged based on how supported it is. So, for example, if I said, I think the best way to get to South Carolina is to go this way, right? You can't really tell me whether or not what I think is true. I think this is the best way to go. It is true that I think that, right? It doesn't matter whether it's true or not. However, whether or not you will evaluate that claim as effective can be found in the objective support that I give for how to get to South Carolina. So if I'm saying, well, I think this is the best way to go because you avoid toll roads, you can get on 77 and it's going to be really fast this time of year, and you can go, 70 miles an hour the whole time, that's my objective support. And if my reader, or the person listening to my thought, finds that support to be credible, worthwhile, and valid, then my subjective claim that this is the best way to get to South Carolina is going to be supported, or is going to be believed, I guess, or I will persuade them. They'll say, okay, cool, I'll take 77 or whatever. Some key identifiers of subjective writing are words like adjectives: delicious, pretty, kind, tiny, confusing, for example. What is delicious to you might not be delicious to me. What is pretty to me might not be pretty to you. If someone is acting kindly toward me, someone else might interpret their actions not as kind, but as pretentious or something. What I think is tiny might just be small compared to what someone else thinks is tiny. If I said, I live in a tiny house, that's actually something now, isn't it? But I have a tiny amount of money here, and maybe you've got like $40 and you feel like that's tiny, but I'm like, look, I have $2 and that feels tiny. What I think is confusing might not be confusing for someone else. So adjectives are often key identifiers of subjective writing. Opinions. I thought that was interesting. I didn't like the way he explained that. My preference is to do group activities, blah, blah, blah. all of that is subjective. Again, it focuses on the individual, on the mind, and how they feel, how they think. First person pronouns can also be identifiers of subjective writing. So let's take a look at some examples. We're going to see an example of a subjective statement and an objective statement. So first thing, we Americans need to elect a president who is mature and who is able to make wise decisions. That is subjective. We need to do something. Whether or not we need to do something is subjective. The word mature is an adjective. The word wise is an adjective. So these are subjective statements. Now, something that's more objective, that's kind of along the same lines, would be to be elected president of the United States, a candidate must be at least 35 years of age. That is just simply either true or false. It's objective. Let's look at another example. In an Irish study, participants who exercised showed measurable improvement of their memory, while participants who did not exercise showed no improvement. That is objective. Where did we get that information? It didn't come from our brain. It's not something we think. It is, I looked at this study, and here's the results from this study. I am not trying to subjectively put my interpretations on this study. It's just, hey, I noticed these participants did this, and the other ones did that. However, something is subjective would sound like all students should exercise, not just because exercise is fun, but also because it is good for the brain. Okay, so the word should is also often an indicator of subjectivity, and should is very subjective. The biggest mistake a newcomer to the workforce makes is to choose a career and stick to it regardless of changing circumstances. That's an opinion, right? That is a subjective opinion. Maybe someone else would say the biggest mistake someone could make when they're coming to the workforce is not acting professionally. So biggest, EST, your superlative type words, those also show subjectivity. Look at number 2. Surveys conducted by researchers at the Bureau of Labor Statistics show that workers under 24 years of age are more likely to switch jobs than older workers. Okay, that is true. If that's true, it's objective. That is objective. When I say that, it sounds like I'm saying subjective. Number 2 is objective. They looked at the survey, they analyzed the results, they reported on the information found. That is an objective statement. So I will read these sentences and I want you to decide which 2 are subjective. You pause the video at any point before I turn to the next slide, and then the next slide will have the answers. So, sentence 1. Troubleshooting is the most important skill for a software developer, period. Sentence 2. Currently, there are over 400,000 computer systems analysts working in the United States, period. Sentence 3. Whether or not students intend to pursue a career in technology, all students should have excellent computer skills in order to be competitive in today's job market, period. Sentence 4. Computer systems analysts earn an average annual income of approximately $83,000, period. All right, answers. The first and third sentences are your subjective sentences. So let's look at the first one. Troubleshooting is the most important skill. Here we've got that superlative statement. That is just an opinion. Maybe someone else would say, no, a software developer's most important skill is coding. That what is the most important skill is purely a subjective, opinion-based statement. So that's an example of a subjective sentence. And our other subjective sentence is the third one. Whether or not students intend to pursue a career in technology, all students should have excellent computer skills in order to be competitive in today's job market. So, again, that's saying that something should be or should happen or you should do something is your opinion, and thus that makes it subjective. Okay, and so I have a final thought. Try not to totally make the mistake of confusing true, false with objective and subjective. It's there. There's definitely a connection. However, I want to look at a couple of examples that I hope will exemplify my final thought. On July 31st, 2020, it was 17 degrees in North Carolina. Okay, it's false. There's no way that it was 17 degrees Fahrenheit, I should say, July 31st, 2020. But just because it's false doesn't make it subjective, right? I'm not thinking it was 17 degrees. I'm just wrong. It's something called a false fact. It's fake news, you could say. His favorite color is purple. This statement is true, right? But it's also objective because I'm talking about him, this guy over here, right? I have no personal feelings whatsoever on whether or not his favorite color is purple. It just is. How could we prove that? I could walk up to him and ask him, hey, man, what's your favorite color? And he would say purple, or he wouldn't. But either way, it's an objective statement. Because it's just, it's true that his favorite color is purple, or it's false, but there's no subjectivity. Here's a statement about favorite colors that is subjective. If I said the best color is orange, maybe you don't agree with me. It's not true or false. You just don't agree. Maybe your favorite color is pink, and you would say, no, the best color is pink. We cannot come to a truth on that because it's subjective. My favorite color is orange. The statement is true and subjective. It's confusing, right? It is true, but it is also coming from your personal opinions on color, right? It might be true that my favorite color is orange, in just the same way that it's true that his favorite color is purple, but it's from the speaker. It's like the opinions of the person speaking. Does that make sense? It's confusing a little bit, maybe, but I think that these are some good nuances of subjective and objective and true-false type items. Okay, if you have any questions about any of this content in the video, please send me an email.